Welcome to the Accidental Experts podcast. I'm your host, Bryce Hamilton. I'm a licensed clinical social worker and a child and family therapist. I have been in practice for over 15 years, and I'm also a mom of 4. So I know the challenges both professionally and personally. I'm so glad that you're here today to grow your parenting toolbox. Please come as you are and be ready to learn. My goal is to make you the accidental expert so that you can raise healthy humans. Hi, guys. I'm so glad that you're back today. I have an awesome guest for you guys. You may know her from Instagram. She's the family behaviorist, and her name is Mandy. She is a special education teacher, and she has her BCBA, which is basically an expert in understanding behavior. And she is going to break down today for us like how to understand our kids' behaviors and what's behind them, because I think that is such an important piece of parenting. Is it's hard. And if we don't understand our kids' behaviors, we're never going to line up, and we're going to keep having them do behaviors we don't like, and we're going to keep redirecting them in ways that don't get us the outcomes that we want. So Mandy's going to break it down for us to help us understand their behavior and how to become better parents. With that, let's get to Mandy.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yes, absolutely. Okay, so let's jump in it and say parenting is exhausting. We both are parents, we get that part, but it's exhausting for everybody. What general advice do you have for parents? What do you think they need to know or would be helpful for them to know?
Sure. So I think one of the biggest things is not knowing how to respond to a behavior. And so that causes us to respond differently each time, which is intermittent reinforcement, and then can cause things to get worse. So really working on a couple of like carrier phrases or canned responses so you know what to say in the moment to even like buy you time to figure it out. I think that's one of the biggest takeaways. The other thing is as parents, we usually respond to behavior, whether that be a timeout or taking them out of the situation or taking the toy away or whatever. And we forget about teaching them what to do instead, that replacement behavior. And so if you could focus on one thing over the other, the replacement behavior will give you a bigger bang for your buck as it generalizes across a variety of things.
Yeah, that makes sense. So what are the functions of behavior? What are the like motivating pieces behind that? Let's break that down so that people can understand.
Sure. So in behavior analysis, there are 4 functions of behavior: attention, escape, access, and automatic. So attention, your kid is doing homework and they scream and throw themselves on the floor. They want your attention. They want you to come over and help. Escape, it's time to unload the dishwasher and your kid hightails it to the bathroom. Access, you're in the grocery store and they really want that candy and they're getting louder and louder. And then automatic is like sensory seeking behavior. So I have a thumb sucker, so that behavior is automatic. But that being said, any example I just gave really depends on context. So, for
Sure.
example, one of my daughters is a thumb sucker, one of them is not. So when the one who is not comes over to me and sticks her thumb in her mouth, that's probably attention seeking. So you really have to
Yeah.
look at the context under which the behavior is occurring.
Yeah. And I love this idea of access, because I think sometimes I don't think about that piece as a parent. And it's like I have had situations that have been kind of rolling through my head around access of like, it could be like, you want to buy this thing, right? And we were at a fundraiser for one of my kids' schools the other day, and there was like an auction for a thing, and one of my kids was like, "Let's do it, let's bid," and we were like, "Hold on," right? But it was like this fear that that thing was going to be gone because the auction was going to end. That's a great marketing ploy for us too, right? Like they use it against us too in life. But to think about like, why are kids doing that behavior at this moment where they were totally fine, but now they're upset about something? And it's like, oh, what is the reason behind that? Oh, we're going to leave Target, or we're going to leave the store, or we're going to be someplace else. Or it could be like access to treats that we're gone outside, like just doing some stuff outside, and they're inside. They might have access to something, which is why they would choose to do a behavior. I think that's a good one, but I think we understand all the other ones. That makes sense. So what is reinforcement? You talked about intermittent reinforcement. Like, what is the idea of reinforcement, and how do we use that as parents to our benefit?
So really reinforcement in terms of like the definition is anything that occurs after a behavior that increases the likelihood it'll occur again. Punishment
Mhm.
decreases the likelihood it'll occur again. But both of those words are measured by the outcome they produce, not our intention. So for
Mhm.
example, if every time the homework gets tough, I send my kid to their room because they're yelling or whatever, and then they keep yelling every time the homework happens, regardless if my intention was to punish, right, to decrease, to remove access, whatever, it is reinforcing because it's increasing the likelihood the behavior is occurring again. So reinforcement is just finding something preferable or that the child wants to elicit that'll increase the likelihood that behavior occurs again. I think sometimes we get stuck on that being like a treat or a candy. It can be a variety of things. My daughters work with their morning routine for who gets to make my coffee in the morning. Like, okay, like silly things.
Mhm.
Who gets to pick the song we play in the car, what podcast we're going to listen to. And sometimes it's even just verbal praise or like acknowledgement. So it can be
Mhm.
a variety of things. But the one caveat being we don't determine what's reinforcing for another person ever. So just be like, oh, well, like I told him he could advocate. Well, I might not want that candy. So it depends on
Mhm.
each child individually.
Yeah, so we really have to also get curious with our kids about what helps them to reinforce behavior or notice, right? Like, I notice that that seems to be helping you to get ready faster. Do you like that? Because they can be part of the process too, right? We don't have to just have it as a parent.
Yeah, and they can get satiated on things too, and so you might need to mix it up. Or
Mhm.
one big thing that parents sometimes miss is isolating reinforcement. So, for example, with my 2-year-old, we were working on the morning routine because she would come out of a room, all that kind of
Mhm.
stuff. So we put a system in place, and she was earning chocolate milk. But I need to make sure that the only time she gets chocolate milk is in the morning, because if Dad gives her chocolate milk with lunch and Grandma is babysitting and gives her chocolate milk, she's not really going to care to do that for the morning because she gets it for free other times. So we need
Yeah.
to be really mindful about the access surrounding that.
Yeah. Well, and that makes it hard as a parent because that means we're having to do a lot of thoughtful work ahead of time, right? So,
Totally.
and to get like the other important people in that child's life on the same team to say, like, hey, this is what we're doing and this is why. And then if they understand it, a lot of times they're supportive, but it's hard when it's like, when we're doing something and then we feel like somebody is kind of coming under us and sabotaging that, but not intentionally. Like dad
Totally.
giving chocolate milk for lunch is just a kind parent thing.
Right.
But if it's a reward, then we have to be thoughtful about that. So when we talk about intermittent reinforcement, that tell us what that means. Like
Sure.
how does that differentiate from just like reinforcement?
So reinforcement can happen on a variety of scales, like 1-to-1, like a fixed interval where every time you do the behavior, you get reinforcement. It could be a variable interval where like every 3 times you do the behavior. Intermittent reinforcement is that slot machine example. Like you keep pulling the trigger because you never know when it's going to hit. It's the strongest form of reinforcement because it happens at random. So
Mhm.
like back to like, if we want to make the analogy back to Pavlov and learning about the science of behavior, it's the mouse hitting the bar to get the pellets. So they don't know when it's coming, they're going to hit the bar more. So we need to use intermittent reinforcement to increase the likelihood a behavior will occur again. However, as parents, we really, really often accidentally use intermittent reinforcement when we're trying to change a behavior. And so I'll meet with a lot of parents who are like, this is like happening more and more. I'm like, okay, well, let's look at like how we're responding.
Mhm.
I was working with a family today who was trying to decrease like nighttime wakings. So obviously there's two functions there, right? Attention and escape. Um, and so she was getting really caught up on like, well, he was really hot this time. Well, like, oh, well, this time he had a bad dream. Or like, oh, this time he needed a drink. And I'm like, listen, all of those are very valid. And let's talk about proactive strategies. But he's also learning, like, I'm gonna keep pushing it to see which one works. That's that
Mhm.
intermittent reinforcement. So then he's gonna keep engaging in that because it was effective at some point.
Yeah. So I mean, it's kind of like if your kid's asking for something, you say like no, 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 and they keep asking, and then you say yes. That is the same thing as like if you are going to say yes to something, I think the strategy is say yes initially versus because then it's like if you say no, it means no.
Right,
And if you say
exactly.
yes, then it means yes. But that's hard because sometimes we're like, I don't want to do it, but then they say something and they're like, okay, fine, do it. Like, or
Totally.
whatever, have it. And I'm just like done with that. Yeah.
And you just have to look for those patterns. Like we're
Yeah.
parents, like it's not gonna be super strict like that. We don't live in that
Sure.
world. But if you're noticing it's happening over and over, like you just have to look for patterns and be self-aware of that. And if you see this pattern emerging, adjust
Mhm.
accordingly and try to be mindful about how you're responding. But
Yeah.
also some kids are okay with that and sometimes it works. It really depends.
Yeah. Yeah. I think every kid is so different in terms of who they are and how much they can tolerate. But yeah. Okay. So what is a replacement behavior? So sometimes we talk about in parenting, like replacing a behavior with something else. What does that mean?
So any behavior you want to decrease should have a replacement behavior you want to increase. So this is back to what we were talking about at the beginning about parents responding to behavior but not replacing it. So
Hmm.
two siblings are fighting over a toy. The older sibling rips the toy out of the younger sibling's hands. We take the toy and we remove the sibling. Okay, great. We've responded to behavior, but we have not taught the older sibling how to navigate wanting a toy that their younger sibling has. So the replacement behavior, depending on age, might be giving the younger sibling a different toy. It might be asking for a turn. It might be setting a timer so when can they have a turn? All
Hmm.
of those sort of things, because ultimately it's okay to want the toy. How do we teach them how to access the toy?
Yeah. Great advice. So attention seeking behavior, what does it look like and how can we respond?
Well, it kind of depends. It can look like a variety of things. So, for example, my daughter used to be like, "Nobody loves me," and I was like, "Oh my god, yes, we do. We love you so much. Everybody loves you." And then that happened a few days later, and I responded the same way. And then it happened a few days later, and I was like, "Ruh-roh, this is increasing, so I have to change something here." So that behavior was attention seeking. So, like we talked about with the replacement behavior, I outlined a replacement behavior. So instead of validating and saying, "Of course we love you," because I don't want to teach her that I speak negatively about myself and somebody gives me attention and tells me that's not true.
Hmm.
I started saying to her, "It seems like you're having some big feelings. I'll be happy to talk to you about it when you're ready. You can let me know you're ready." And so she started saying, "I'm ready to talk about it." And we would talk through a lot of it surrounded like sibling jealousy. And so we put that in place for about 2 weeks. And then she came upstairs after a shower one day, and her sister and I were having a dance party. And she said, "Ugh, mom, I feel really jealous." And I was like, "Oh my God, that's so great." So it allowed us, the replacement behavior was sort of naming that feeling and talking about
Hmm.
that feeling, which was so much more effective for her than the self-deprecating "nobody loves me" comment. So again,
Yeah.
that replacement behavior and attention seeking, we want to teach them how to get our attention appropriately.
Yes.
So a kind of a theme here, but like often we will be like, "I'm ignoring that." Okay, planned ignoring is appropriate, but we also want to teach them what to do instead,
Hmm.
because just ignoring them is not solving the problem, it's avoiding the problem completely.
Yeah. Well, and it's hard because sometimes we're not sure what to do.
Totally.
And so then we are like, I'm going to ignore this because I can't tolerate this behavior. And then we blow up as parents because it doesn't stop the behavior sometimes. I mean, sometimes it does, but then also it's not improving our connection with our kids, which I think is so key. And so I'm always like, let's get curious about this. So your daughter saying you are feeling she's feeling sad for herself, she's feeling left out or whatever, and it's like, oh, I'm curious about what that's about, right? Then we actually figure out what the problem is so that we can actually come up with a solution. But it's hard to be curious sometimes because sometimes we just want it to go away, and but then ignoring doesn't really work well.
Yes, that comes down to the function of our behavior, right?
Yeah.
The function of our behavior is often to stop it. So, for example, my kids, I put them to bed and I still hear them talking, like, "I'm gonna go up the stairs heavy-footed." And the intention is their attention. I want them to know I'm coming. And the other
Hmm.
part of it is escape. I want them to hear that and lay in bed and be quiet.
Hmm.
So we need to be really mindful about our behavior. This happens a lot, whether, the kid's screaming about the lollipop and we give the lollipop. We want the behavior to stop. We want to escape it. So
Hmm.
learning how to escape that appropriately while building our children's capacity is a really big, important part.
Yeah, I agree. Okay, so let's move on to reward ideas. So do you think that kids need rewards, and if we reward them, will we always have to?
So here's the short answer to that. If you're able to change behavior through other ways, amazing, do that. But I guess my response is people often say, like, what about intrinsic motivation? What do you do if intrinsic motivation doesn't exist? So we
Hmm.
just keep digging our heels in, hoping it will come. My answer to that is to tie an outside reinforcer or outside reward to that behavior and then fade that reward.
Hmm.
I think that's the part that people miss. So another example was back in March. I have three daughters. 7, 5, and 2, and our mornings were disastrous. My husband leaves really early, so it's just me and the girls, and I was totally a part of this, had gotten lazy, and it just wasn't working well. So we went to the dollar store and I had them each pick out one thing under $1, and I was like, "We're gonna do a reset. If you are up and dressed by the time your light turns green, Like you can earn one of the things that you picked out. Now, this is not forever. We did that for 1 week. They earned every day with the exception of my 2-year-old. She missed one day. And then the next week I was like, okay, if we can do 3 out of the 5 days, we earn this. And then now it's faded.
Mhm.
So fading can be really natural and sometimes it has to be really intentional.
Mhm.
But it's certainly not forever. And I don't think it needs to be forever.
Yeah. Well, and we can go back to it. Like if they stop doing the behavior we like, we can also go back to the reward. And I think it's about your kid being motivated too, right? So like you need the right carrot per se, right? The right motivator to get them. But I think especially when we're looking at ADHD kids or any kid that is neurodiverse, like is really, really hard to be intrinsically motivated, to have that just like internal desire to do the thing. And so I think parents forget that that's the case. And as adults, we're motivated by a lot of things. Like we get paid when we go to work, right? We get a compliment on an outfit that we're wearing, or like we have these different rewards built into our lives, and we kids should have them too. And I think I'm a huge advocate for rewarding, but I think also we don't have to reward forever. And it's about like getting the behavior to be consistent and then kind of pulling it away, just like you suggested. I think that's fantastic.
Yeah, and there's lots of ways to fade too. So my 2.5-year-old, we really worked on her in the fall, staying in her room until the light turned green. And then instead of like taking away the reward, I kept the reward and I increased the complexity. So then she had to stay in her room and take her pajamas off. Then she had to stay in her room and take her pajamas off and put her pants on. And now we're at the point where like, yep, you need to be fully dressed. And
Mhm.
now we intermittently reward. So the expectation is that everyone gets fully dressed. And if they do, oh, we earned chocolate milk or juice this morning.
Yeah.
But there are times it's like, oh, no, not this morning. And that's okay too.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think kids are totally tolerable of that. Like we do not have to always have the reward. And as adults, we do a lot of things that don't get a reward right away too. And so it's teaching them those adult skills when we're young. And also I think breaking it down, what you said with the idea of like breaking it into pieces where they can manage. Like you don't want your 2-year-old to expect that they have to get themselves dressed all by themselves and whatever without coaching in that piece, right? So we're doing lots of modeling and building up to that. So I think that's important too. So we quickly kind of like transverse a lot of data, and reinforcements are kind of a big thing, but I think it's important for us to understand that our behaviors reinforce or do not reinforce, or it can be both positive and negative in terms of our kids' behaviors. What do you want parents to take away from this conversation that we had?
Yeah, so I think a big part is being self-aware and looking for those patterns. And I have to say, in coaching, so many parents do come so self-aware. And so one of the things we'll talk about is like, okay, and then what happened? Okay, and then what happened? Okay, and then what happened? And
Mm-hmm.
sometimes the parents will be like, I raised my voice and listen, that happened, and that's okay.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not, we try very hard, obviously, but I am not on some like high horse here. Like, okay, it's okay that you lost it, but what are some things we can build in? So really looking at how we are responding to behavior, because ultimately behavior is reinforced by whatever happens. So whether that means we're ignoring it and they're escaping, or we're blowing up and they're doing that again. If a behavior is continuing to happen, really look at how you're responding and what you could be doing differently that might
Mm-hmm.
change that. And one of the big things is like having a very predictable response. The more predictable attention seeking behavior will decrease really significantly once we are predictable in our response.
Yeah. Can you give an example of what that would be in your life
Yeah.
or?
So
Mhm.
there are a couple of phrases that I like keep in my back pocket. First then. So if you find yourself getting frustrated, your kid's not putting their shoes on, first then, or when then. When you put your shoes on, then we can go to the park. First put your shoes on, then we can go to the park. I'll know you're ready when. So if my kid is
Mhm.
getting really escalated, seems like you're having a hard time, I'll know you're ready when you're sitting in the blue chair, when you're picking up the Magnetiles, whatever that would
Mhm.
look like. Try to avoid the word calm, because that'll be like, I am calm. And then you're back into like, you're not calm. And then it's a debate again.
Yeah.
And just, yeah, like really outlining the expected behavior. Like, I can tell you need X right now. I'll be able to help you when you do Y. And
Mhm.
kind of taking yourself out of that battle, which is hard to do. I usually realize I'm in a power struggle about like the third or fourth exchange. And I'm like, ah, so, but it's never too late to say, oh, you know what? Seems like you're having a hard time. I'll be happy to help you when blank.
Mhm.
And that can change a little bit, but just being super consistent with that can be really helpful.
Yeah, that's great advice. Okay, so what do you think has been your biggest area of growth as a parent?
I think that flexibility and learning that each of your kids sort of has a different need. I think the principles apply the same, but like for example, my middle is very sensitive to tone. She'll be like,
Mhm.
"You're yelling at me." I'm like, didn't yell, but like whether that's the way that you're delivering it, and her perception is her reality. So working on, how I can deliver the same message in a tone that she can hear, that sort of thing is really important.
Yeah, this is all really fantastic advice. Thank you so much for coming with us today. We really enjoyed it.
Thank you so much for your time.
Yeah. I don't know about you guys, but that was fantastic information. I loved hearing Mandy's take on behaviors and how to help redirect them and how to use reinforcement and to be aware as parents of how we're doing things. If you guys want to know more about Mandy, she's going to offer us a special promo, and I'll have that in the show notes. And you can go to familybehaviorist.com to get more information. If you like what we're doing, please like and subscribe, rate us, follow us on Facebook and Instagram and YouTube, and also send us more episode suggestions. We are loving all the emails. Hit us up at accidentalexperts@gmail.com. Thank you so much for your time today. Have a fantastic day. Some words from our legal team.
The information presented in this podcast is not intended or implied to be a substitute for appropriate professional advice, diagnosis, or treatment. All content, including text, graphics, images, and information contained on or available through this podcast, is for general information purposes only. This podcast makes no representations and assumes no responsibility for the accuracy or information on or available through this podcast, and such information is subject to change without notice. You are encouraged to confirm any information obtained through this program with other sources and review all information regarding any condition or treatment with the appropriate professionals.
What we're saying is, yes, I am a real therapist, but I'm not your therapist.